Inheriting a house might be a dream for some, but what if you inherited a home and found that it had been hiding something unimaginable for nearly a century? Something buried within the walls, kept secret by the previous owners, and linked to a haunting family legacy that nobody dared speak of. Today, we will dive into one of the darkest family secrets in American history, a story that, when uncovered, sent shockwaves through a small town in New England and would shake its very foundation. This is the tale of the Durham family of Millbrook, Connecticut, and the chilling discovery that ultimately unraveled their tightly held, horrifying secret. Before we go further, I must warn you. The tale you are about to hear contains elements that might be unsettling for some. The truth the Durham family tried to conceal for so long defies all reason. And the devastating truth they buried within those walls would consume them in ways unimaginable. For those who may be sensitive to stories involving violence or disturbing discoveries, I would suggest you stop reading now. But for the rest of you, brace yourself for a journey that will uncover one of the most disturbing and tragic family histories ever told. It starts with Sarah Collins, a 28-year-old freelance journalist from Boston who specialized in historical mysteries and unsolved crimes. Sarah had been making a name for herself in true crime circles, investigating cold cases for various magazines, but nothing could have prepared her for the discovery she made on October 15, 2019, a day that would change her life forever. On that day, Sarah inherited something she never expected, a massive, ancient Victorian mansion from her great-aunt, Margaret Durham, a woman she had met only twice in her life. The first encounter occurred back in 2013 at Sarah's college graduation. Margaret had appeared unexpectedly, an elegant, elderly woman with sharp blue eyes and an unsettling smile that Sarah would never forget. The woman had offered a strange piece of advice. The truth has a way of finding those brave enough to seek it, dear. Remember that. The second and final meeting took place at Margaret's funeral, just 2 weeks before Sarah received the inheritance papers. Margaret, the last surviving member of one of Millbrook's oldest and most influential families, had passed away at the age of 95. The Durhams were known for their wealth, built in the late 1800s with their textile factory, and their large, sprawling estate on Elm Street, which had been constructed in 1887. The house stood as a proud symbol of old money grandeur, perched on 12 acres of prime Connecticut real estate. But when Sarah arrived, she didn't just inherit property. She inherited a secret that had been buried beneath the walls for generations. The Durham Mansion. The three-story mansion was a monumental structure, grand and imposing, with a copper bell tower and ornate wooden carvings. The property had once been the pride of Millbrook, boasting lush gardens and an air of untouchable beauty. The Durham Textile Mill, a thriving business at its peak, had employed half of Millbrook's population, and its success had made the family among the most powerful in town. Even after the mill's closure in the 1960s, the Durham name continued to influence the local economy, donating generously to charities and businesses. The family's wealth flowed into the town like a steady river, carrying its residents with it. But Margaret's death marked the end of an era. The mansion stood empty for the first time in over a century. No one had lived there for months. No family members were left to tend to it. And as Sarah stood at the gates of the house, she realized something was terribly wrong. The house feels wrong. As Sarah parked her car on that cold October afternoon, she was struck by the oppressive atmosphere surrounding the mansion. The October sky hung over her like a heavy curtain, its gray clouds stretching long shadows across the overgrown lawn. But it wasn't just the weather, it was the house. The mansion loomed before her like something from a Gothic novel, its dark, vacant windows watching her every step. The realtor had warned her that the house had been empty for a while, and that Margaret had lived there alone for her final years, with only a part-time caretaker. But nothing prepared Sarah for the overwhelming sense of malevolence that seemed to cling to the mansion like a second skin.
"I know it sounds crazy," Sarah later admitted, "but from the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. There was this pressure in the air, like the walls themselves were staring at me. The atmosphere was thick, heavy, almost like I was breathing it in. There was this undercurrent of fear and guilt, and the smell, it was awful. Like something had died and was left to rot, but also something else, something chemical, medicinal. It made my stomach turn."
The interior of the house felt like a time capsule, a relic from a bygone era. Velvet curtains blocked the natural light, casting the rooms in a perpetual twilight. Dust-covered furniture lay under sheets, but what Sarah could see spoke of wealth, opulence, and the passing of time. Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, and gilded oil paintings decorated every room, but something about it all made her uneasy. Her journalist instincts were on high alert, but this was more than curiosity. It was a sense of dread. Sarah had planned to simply assess the property, take some photographs, and get an idea of what she was dealing with before selling it. After all, she lived in a cramped studio apartment in Boston, and the mansion was a massive property with upkeep that could bankrupt her in months. But something in the air, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere, compelled her to stay longer. She decided to spend the night, thinking she could camp out and return to Boston the next day. She made herself comfortable in the parlor, spreading out a sleeping bag on the faded carpet. With her flashlight in hand, she began her investigation of the house. Every step she took deeper into the mansion felt like stepping further into the past, into something that wasn't meant to be uncovered. As the hours stretched, Sarah found herself drawn to the study, a room tucked away behind a grand archway, where the air was thick with the scent of leather and dust. There, she made her first discovery. The desk was old, almost ancient, but what caught her eye were the locked drawers. One drawer, however, was slightly ajar. With her heart racing, Sarah carefully pried it open, revealing papers scattered across the floor. There were letters, lots of them, each one addressed to someone called the Keeper, and signed with various initials, not full names. She began to read, her hands trembling as she went through the letters. The language was coded, but enough of it was clear for her to piece together a chilling picture. One letter, dated 1994, was the most explicit. It read, "Thomas arrives next month. All preparations have been made according to the ancient protocols. The family is eager to proceed with the harvest." Her breath caught in her throat. The term harvest, it was too precise to ignore. It wasn't a coincidence. She was onto something far darker than she ever expected. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to call the police, but something kept her going. The story, the mystery, it was all too important. The portraits on the wall. Sarah's exploration took her up to the second floor. The grand staircase creaked beneath her, each step feeling like a warning. The hallway was lined with family portraits, but as she examined them closely, she realized something was wrong. The portraits seemed perfectly normal at first glance.
But the more she looked, the more she noticed there was always an odd number of children in every photo. That was strange, but the most unnerving part was that in each picture, one of the children appeared to be missing. The outline of their figure was there, but it had been carefully erased, as if someone had deliberately removed them from the family's history. Each portrait, stretching back over the years, displayed the same pattern. A child between the ages of 12 and 16, always removed. The other family members remained in the frame, their faces marked by a strange expression, guilt mixed with something else, something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Sarah spent hours taking photographs of every portrait, documenting the pattern. The earliest portrait she found was of Jeremiah Durham, the family patriarch, with his wife Constance and their 4 children. But one child was missing, carefully cut out. The following generations revealed the same eerie pattern. Children removed from the family's visual history, their absence marked by the same cold satisfaction in the eyes of those left behind. It was as if the family had lost someone, yet gained something in return, a chilling, deliberate erasure that reached through time. And Sarah could feel herself slipping deeper into a web of unspeakable truths. The 3rd floor held the children's bedrooms. Most of the rooms were dusty and faded, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She wandered into one room that stood apart from the others. Its wallpaper was adorned with sailboats and anchors, an unusual choice for a child's room, but it was the oddness of the room that struck Sarah. The atmosphere here was different, not in the sense of decay, but in the feeling of something more recent being out of place. Upon closer inspection, Sarah noticed a section of the wallpaper near the window that seemed different from the rest. It was less faded, almost like it had been replaced more recently. Her heart thudded in her chest as she pressed against the wall. It gave way with an unnerving creak. Something was behind it. The hidden alcove. She rushed downstairs to grab a kitchen knife, the air in her lungs tight and sharp. Her fingers fumbled as she sliced through the wallpaper. What she found behind it was a small alcove, only 3 feet by 3 feet and about 2 feet deep. The sight that greeted her was something no family should ever have to face. Inside the alcove were items that told a terrible story. Children's clothing, preserved across decades, folded neatly in piles. A collection of diaries, leather-bound, their covers worn but intact. But the most unsettling part of all were the photographs. These were not normal family photographs. They were pictures of children, boys, all appearing to match the missing figures in the portraits downstairs. The clothes were carefully preserved, despite the ravages of time. There were knickers and suspenders from the 1920s, dungarees from the 1940s, bell-bottom jeans from the 1970s, and modern clothing from recent decades. Each set of clothes had a name and the date written inside. Thomas. The name appeared again and again. Thomas from 1926, Thomas from 1941, Thomas from 1967, Thomas from 1984, and, most chillingly, Thomas from 2003. Sarah sat frozen on the floor, surrounded by this grotesque history. How could one child named Thomas have written diaries spanning over 80 years? How could the Durham family have been hiding these belongings, these memories, for so long? Sarah sat in the small alcove, the diaries scattered around her like discarded clues from a forgotten world.
The realization of what she had stumbled upon was overwhelming. Each diary, each item in the alcove told a story that should never have existed, a truth that was buried so deep it had remained hidden for decades. And yet the more Sarah read, the more she understood. This wasn't a random inheritance. This was a dark inheritance, one that carried the weight of blood, rituals, and a secret so terrible that it had been kept locked away for almost a century. The diaries, a pattern spanning decades. She picked up the oldest diary first, the leather cover cracked with age, but the pages still intact. It was dated 1926. The handwriting inside was careful, childlike in its precision. The story that unfolded before her eyes was both mundane and terrifying. The boy who had written it, a young Thomas, described arriving at the Durham house, welcomed into the family as one of their own. At first, it seemed normal. The boy spoke of lavish meals, expensive clothes, and the excitement of being part of such a wealthy family. But the deeper Sarah read, the more she understood that there was something wrong with this picture. The entries grew darker, filled with hints of things that didn't add up, the warnings from others not to ask too many questions, the strange rituals the family performed in secret, and the increasingly bizarre meals he was given, always prepared by Mrs. Durham, always with strange ingredients. As the diary continued, Thomas spoke of feeling an unbearable sense of isolation, of dreams that felt more like visions, and of his growing fear as his 13th birthday approached. Then the entries stopped abruptly. The final note read, "Tomorrow is my 13th birthday. Mr. Durham says it's time for me to join the family permanently. I don't know what he means, but I'm scared. If anyone finds this diary, please tell my parents I love them." Sarah's growing horror. The entries were disturbing enough, but Sarah's journalistic instincts demanded answers. She carefully flipped through the remaining diaries, all written by different boys named Thomas, all showing the same pattern. Each boy arrived at the Durham mansion at the age of 12, treated with kindness and luxury for 1 year, only to experience increasing fear as their 13th birthday neared. Then, just like the first Thomas, their diaries would end abruptly with the same chilling message: "It's time." Sarah's hand shook as she read through the entries, the timeline beginning to form in her mind. 6 boys, 6 Thomases, all disappearing on their 13th birthday. But the strangest part was that the entries were always dated correctly, always after their 12th birthday, always ending the same way. She couldn't ignore the sickening truth that was unfolding before her. The Durham family wasn't simply housing these boys, they were preparing them for something far darker. The deeper Sarah delved into the mystery, the more she realized that the Durham family had a dark secret, one they had kept hidden for generations. But what could this ritual be? And why was it happening? As Sarah examined more of the evidence, clothes, photographs, and notes, the pattern became undeniable. Each year, a new boy, named Thomas, would arrive, and the family would treat him like their own, only for him to disappear at the end of the year. But the ritual they were performing was more than just a family tradition. It was a sacrifice. Sarah's heart pounded as she read through the journals preserved in the basement, the accounts of the ceremonies growing more detailed. They called it the harvest, a ritual performed on the boy's 13th birthday, when the family believed the boy's life essence could be extracted. The entries detailed the process in clinical terms, as though the family had turned the ritual into a methodical science, refining it over generations. Each boy, once reaching the age of 13, was harvested, drained of his life force to ensure the continued health and prosperity of the Durham family. The sacrifices weren't made in haste. They were carefully planned, precisely carried out, and calculated with chilling detail. The family's dark belief. The most disturbing part of the journals was the family's belief in what they were doing. They weren't simply committing murder. They were performing a sacred act. According to the journals, each sacrifice ensured the longevity of the family and the prosperity of the town they dominated. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about survival. The Durhams had convinced themselves that their ritual was necessary to prevent a greater disaster, to preserve not only their legacy, but the entire community. The discovery of the hidden basement. With a cold dread growing in her chest, Sarah knew she had to search the basement. The diaries had alluded to it as a forbidden place, a room no one was allowed to enter. The house had been built with multiple layers of security over the years, but Sarah was determined to find out what was hidden beneath. Using a crowbar she found in the carriage house, she managed to pry open the basement door, which had been sealed shut for decades. What she found defied all reason. The basement was not just a storage space. It had been converted into something far worse. It resembled a medieval laboratory, mixed with a ritual chamber. The stone walls were lined with shelves containing surgical instruments, some old, some modern, and others clearly designed for use in rituals. Tables were set in the center of the room with channels carved into them, as if for draining liquids. At the far end of the room stood a stone altar surrounded by jars containing preserved remains. The air in the room was thick with the scent of decay, but there was also something antiseptic about it, like a hospital operating room that had been abandoned long ago. The unmistakable feeling of death permeated the space. But the most horrifying discovery was the journals, the same journals Sarah had found in the children's bedroom. These journals weren't hidden, they were proudly displayed, documenting the family's ongoing ritual. Each entry detailed the harvest with cold precision. The last entry, made just a few days before Sarah's visit, read, "The boy arrives today, Thomas number 6. He's strong and healthy. The preparation year begins now. Father says the ritual must be performed on the anniversary of his arrival, when the moon is dark and the veil between worlds is thinnest. It is the only way to ensure our family's continued prosperity and longevity. The old ways must be preserved." As Sarah stood in the dimly lit basement, surrounded by evidence of horrors beyond her comprehension, the weight of the past seemed to press down on her. The house, with its suffocating secrets, seemed to be closing in around her. But there was no turning back. She had already uncovered the truth, and now she needed to expose it to the world, no matter the cost. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. The Durham family wasn't just wealthy. They were systematically murdering children in a ritualistic scheme that had gone on for generations. And now it was her responsibility to stop it. The harvest. The journals had detailed the entire process, a ritualistic procedure that spanned decades. Each generation of Durhams had participated in the sacrificial acts, all believing that they were not committing murder, but performing a sacred duty. The boys they took in, always named Thomas, were treated with kindness and luxury for 1 year, only to disappear on their 13th birthday, never to be heard from again. Sarah now understood the full scope of their horror. These weren't just acts of violence. They were part of a deliberate cycle of harvesting. Every 17 years, like clockwork, A new boy would arrive at the Durham mansion, and the ritual would begin again. It was a cycle designed to perpetuate the family's power to ensure their prosperity, but it was also a cycle of death. A death disguised as something holy. A family built on blood. What disturbed Sarah most was the rationality behind the rituals. These weren't the ravings of madmen or some chaotic cult. The Durhams had carefully crafted a belief system, complete with written protocols and scientific precision. They had convinced themselves that the ritual was necessary for their survival, and the town had lived in quiet complicity, turning a blind eye to the sacrifices made to preserve their wealth and power. As Sarah read through the final journals, it became clear that each Thomas had been carefully selected. The family never acted impulsively. Each boy was chosen, raised with care, then disposed of once they reached the age of 13. The entries didn't detail the specifics of the ritual. Those were left to the imagination. But they described the effectiveness of the process. Each new ritual had extended the lives of the Durhams by decades, and their prosperity had continued uninterrupted. Sarah's great-aunt Margaret Durham, the last surviving member of the family, had participated in 4 of these rituals. She had witnessed the disappearances of 4 boys, but the last entry in Margaret's journal, dated just 3 days before her death, revealed the extent of her guilt. Margaret's final entry. I can feel them calling to me, the spirits of the Thomases. Their presence has grown stronger as I've weakened. They want justice, and I am too tired to fight them anymore. The guilt has consumed me for decades, but the family tradition was too strong. Perhaps it's time for the truth to come out. I'm leaving the house to Sarah, my brother's granddaughter. She's a journalist, a seeker of truth. If anyone can expose what we've done, it's her. It was as if Margaret knew her time was running out. She knew that Sarah would uncover the truth she had hidden for so long. But was Sarah ready to handle it? Was she prepared for the overwhelming horror that would unfold when the truth was finally exposed? The search for answers. Armed with the chilling knowledge of the Durham family's past, Sarah sought answers beyond the mansion. She had to know if others had been involved. The town of Millbrook, despite its facade of normalcy, had been complicit for generations. Sarah needed to confront the people who had helped conceal the truth for so long. She drove into Millbrook the following morning, a sense of dread creeping over her. The town seemed unchanged, frozen in time, as if nothing had happened. But Sarah wasn't fooled. She could feel the weight of the town's silence pressing down on her. Harold Petton, the first revelation. Harold Petton, the first revelation. The first person Sarah spoke with was Harold Petton, an elderly man who had spent his life in Millbrook. He had seen the town's transformation, and when Sarah mentioned the Durham house, he grew visibly nervous. "Everyone knew," he whispered. "The whole damn town knew, but nobody talked about it. My grandfather told me his father told him the Durhams weren't like other folks. There was something unnatural about them, something that went back generations. And those boys they took in, they came from families who owed the Durhams money, families who had nowhere else to turn. The Durham family's systematic exploitation." Sarah's heart sank as Harold continued his tale. The Durham family had long been the economic lifeblood of Millbrook. When families found themselves in financial trouble, the Durhams would offer them a deal they couldn't refuse. They would forgive their debts in exchange for their youngest son, who would live with the family for 1 year, treated like royalty. In return, the boy's family would receive financial support, and the boy would be returned once he turned 13, wealthy, healthy, and with a bright future ahead of him. But the reality was far darker. The boys didn't return. They disappeared without a trace. Their families told to accept the lie that they had run away. Harold's story painted a picture of a systematic conspiracy that had existed for generations. And Sarah now had proof. She had seen the evidence in the diaries. With a diary, when Sarah visited the town clerk's office and examined the missing children reports, the pattern became undeniable. Over decades, boys had gone missing, and the town had done nothing. Each disappearance occurred in lockstep with the dates found in the Durham diaries. All from families who had worked for the Durhams, but the disappearances were always dismissed as runaways. No investigation, no answers. Every report was closed within 48 hours, with the official explanation that the children had run away, seeking a better life. But Sarah knew this was a lie. The boys never resurfaced, never sent letters or called home. There were no traces, no evidence they had ever been alive beyond the walls of the Durham mansion. The final revelation. With everything she had uncovered, Sarah knew she had to confront the Durham basement, the source of the rituals. The hidden chambers had always been a forbidden place, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She had come too far to back down now. Using a crowbar, Sarah pried open the basement door, which had been locked with layers of security, padlocks, deadbolts, and even a custom-made steel bar. What she found behind that door was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The basement of horrors. The basement was not just a place of storage. It had been transformed into something much darker. The walls had been reinforced with stone, and the room was filled with tables, surgical instruments, and preserved remains. The chilling evidence suggested a macabre ritual was performed here, one designed to drain the life from the victims, preserving their essence for the benefit of the Durhams. Conclusion of the story. Sarah's final search revealed a network of hidden spaces and concealed rooms, each containing the remains of 6 boys, each one named Thomas, each carefully preserved and arranged like trophies. The evidence was irrefutable. The Durham family had been ritualistically sacrificing boys for over a century, all in the name of prosperity and longevity. Epilogue. With the help of Jenny Williams, the sister of one of the missing boys, Sarah contacted the FBI, bypassing local law enforcement. What followed was the largest investigation in Connecticut's history, and the truth finally came to light. The Durham family, along with several complicit officials, was brought to justice. The mansion was demolished and a memorial garden was built for the 6 victims, each boy's name etched in stone. The End of Silence. The story of Thomas Harper, Thomas Kellerman, Thomas Rodriguez, Thomas Johnson, Thomas Chen, and Thomas Williams was no longer buried. Their names were remembered, not as victims of ritualistic murders, but as boys who were taken too young, whose lives had been stolen.